Hello class, today we are taking a look at how we can multiply fractions by fractions pictorially or using a drawing. So in class we talked about how we need to treat our fractions as rows and columns of our object. We're starting with an amount of 3/5 of a whole, and then we want to take one out of every two groups or parts of those 3/5. So first thing we're going to do is inside our whole rectangle, we're going to shade 3 out of 5 columns using our crosshatches. And that's to represent the fact that we're starting with 3/5 of a whole. 3 out of 5 sections are present to begin with. Now, unfortunately, we don't have all those 3 out of 5. We're only keeping 1/2 of that. So to represent that, we're going to split our whole into 2 rows. Then we can only actually keep half of that. So we're going to do our crosshatches in 1 out of our 2 rows to represent our fraction 1 out of 2. Now, our solution is where we have both. We only had the red to begin with, and we're only keeping the blue. And so the only place where we actually are having our solution is where we have our x's, or our overlap of both types of crosshatch. And so in that overlap, I can see that there's 1, 2, 3 parts. And in the entire whole, this entire rectangle, there are 10 parts when you count them. We know that the number of parts we have is the top of our fraction, and then the number of parts in one whole is the bottom, and we can conclude that 1/2 times 3/5 gives us 3/10. Doing a similar thing in question B, we are going to be able to keep 3 out of 4 parts, or 3 out of 4 groups, of our 2/6 of a whole. So 2/6 of a whole already accounted for in that sentence. Like before, we're going to start with what we have. To begin with, we have 2 out of 6 columns. So we'll go ahead and we'll shade in that we have 2 out of 6. So that's 2 out of our 6 columns shaded in. Now, we are only keeping 3 out of our 4 rows, or 3/4 of that 2/6. So we're going to need to split it into 4 rows, and then we're going to shade 3 out of those 4 to represent that first fraction. So let's split it into 4 equal rows, or as equal as within reason. And we're going to shade 3 out of those 4, like so. Now again, the only things that we actually have are the overlap. We only had the blue to begin with, and we're only keeping where the red is. And I see in there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes with both, out of a total of, well, this is a 6x4 rectangle, so a total of 24 boxes in that rectangle. So my amount that I have is my top of my fraction, and the amount in one whole is the bottom, and that's our 24. Now, we could simplify that fraction, of course. For the model, I'm less concerned about simplifying, but of course, if you did simplify this, you'd take it and you'd divide top and bottom by 6, and that would give you 1/4 as your simplified version. Okay. Likewise, in question A, there was no simplification possible for our 3 out of 10. On the back side, we have these questions here, obviously just practice, not guided practice. And so again, we're going to go ahead and start by explaining what we're doing. For our first fraction, that is what we are keeping. So we're going to keep 1 out of every 4 parts. Our multiplication symbol is of, just like it always is. And then our second fraction is 1/2. So we'll begin by drawing ourselves our whole. And I'm going to treat my 1/2 as 1 out of 2 rows. And so I'll shade in 1 out of my 2 rows. And then I want to keep 1 out of every 4 parts of that. So I'm going to go ahead and do 1 out of 4 columns. Split it up into 4 columns, and I'll do my cross-hatching in 1 out of those 4. Now again, my solution lies where I have my x's, or my overlap, and so I'm going to say we have 1 part in a whole with 8 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so I can conclude that my product is 1/8. In question B, we're again going to treat our first fraction as what we're keeping. So we're going to keep 3 out of every 4 parts. Our multiply sign is of. And then what do we have to begin with? We have 1/3. So again, we'll go ahead and draw our whole rectangle. We'll start by drawing what we had to begin with, which was 1 out of 3 rows. That'll be our 1/3. And then we want to keep 3 out of every 4 parts of that. So I'll start by splitting it up into 4 parts, and I'll shade in 3 of those 4. My solution lies where I have both overlapping, and I see 3 parts. Oops, there's 3 there. And in this hole, it's a 4x3 rectangle, so that'll be 12 parts total. And so I can conclude that my product is my 3 out of 12. Of course, we can simplify that product into 1/4. Looking at question C, my first fraction is what I'm keeping, so I'm going to keep 4 out of every 5 parts of my 2/7. We'll go ahead and draw our rectangle. We need to split it up into 7 rows, so I'll take 6 dividing lines. And we have 2 out of those 7 rows. And then we're going to do our 4 out of every 5 columns. So I'll make 5 columns, and I'll shade in 4 of those. My solution lies where I have my overlap, and I see there 8 parts in a whole. This is a 5x7 rectangle, so the whole has 35 parts. And so I'll conclude that my fraction is 8/35. Finishing up with question D, we're going to be keeping 2 out of every 3 of our 6/8. And so we'll draw a rectangle. We need to do 8 rows. So maybe I should draw that rectangle a bit taller. And we need 6 of those. So everything except the last 2. And then we want to keep 2 out of every 3 parts of that. So I'll make 3 columns and keep 2 of them. Our solution is where we have our x's, our overlap. And we're going to say that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And our whole here is a 3x8, so 24. And so we'll say that our solution is 12/24. which simplifies down to 1/2. Tidy that up a bit. I'll leave our symbolic rule for our next lesson, but I will look at our multiplication statements for these diagrams. Like we did when we were drawing them, we want to think about rows and columns. So for the rows, I see 1 filled in out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total. And for my columns, I see 3 filled in out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total. And so my multiplication statement will be 1/5 for my rows times 3 out of 8 for my columns. My solution is going to be my 3 overlapping boxes. And since this is a 5 by 8 rectangle, there's 40 boxes in total. Similarly, over here, let's look at our rows and columns. We have 3 out of 5 columns. And for my rows, I have 4 out of 5. And so for my multiplication statement, I'll have my 4 out of 5 times my 3 out of 5. My solution is going to be the overlap, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And this is a 5 by 5 rectangle, so it's 25 on the bottom. So again, just thinking about your rows and columns to figure out your fractions. How many out of how many for your rows? How many columns out of what total columns for your other fraction? I will mention with all of these, it doesn't really matter which fraction you treat as the rows and which fraction you treat as the columns. And it also doesn't matter the order of these numbers. So if you wanted to swap those around, that would be fine. If you wanted to swap these around, that would be fine as well. It doesn't matter which fraction is the rows, which fraction is the columns. Same thing up here. If you wanted to do 2 out of 3 rows and 6 out of 8 columns for question D, that would be fine as well, compared to the 2 out of 3 columns and 6 out of 8 rows that we did here. So I hope that's helped you with your multiplying fractions symbolically, or pictorially, excuse me.